The broken racket held together with electrical tape. The worn-out tennis shoes stuffed with newspaper to keep them snug. That boy, Carlos Alcaraz, still went to the court despite an empty stomach and streetlights too dim to clearly see the baseline. No one was watching. No one was live streaming. There was only the solitary bark of dogs in Palmar and a father restringing every single filament of the racket as if stitching hope into the cracked wooden frame. A child who once cried not because he lost a match, but out of fear. If I lose again, Dad won't have enough money to take me to the next tournament. And then 10 years later at Wimbledon, amidst the flashbulbs and cheers of tens of thousands of spectators, he walked out with a gleaming Rolex on his wrist, facing Novak Djokovic. A roar, an unbelievable passing shot, and history was rewritten. People started chanting Carlos's name as if hailing a new king of tennis. But what lies behind the title of successor to the Big Three? The truth at the 14-minute mark will make you see him in a completely different light. Because Carlos doesn't live in a $1 million mansion in Malibu. He still keeps a small room at his old house in Palmar, where the single bed still bears the mark of a felt-tip pen, Roland Garros 20, written by him at age 8. A place with no crystal chandeliers, but containing all the reasons why he never loses his way. No one knows much about the girl who often stood silently in the wings whenever Carlos won. Not an actress, not a model. Just a recreational tennis player and law student, the only person who could make Alcaraz smile even after losing a match. But then she disappeared. What happened? And is Carlos truly living the life every athlete dreams of? Or are there unspoken cracks behind the glory? Subscribe to the Pro Tennis 360 channel now to not miss the most exclusive, hidden corners of the real lives of court legends. Because what you are about to see may forever change the way you look at Carlos Alcaraz. From a cramped living room to the first racket, a childhood with no shortcuts. Palmar is not on any tourist map of Spain. It is a quiet, rural area where the scorching summers tend the skin and the winds carry only dust. But it was there that a boy began his journey to redefine perseverance. With a tennis racket larger than his body, Carlos Alcaraz was born in 2003, the second of 4 brothers. His father, Carlos Alcaraz Sr., was a semi-professional player who later became a coach at the Real Sociedad Club de Campo. His mother, Virginia, worked at IKEA, managing every penny to feed 6 mouths in a house that was likely smaller than the garage of many current ADP players. The family never truly lacked food, but luxury was out of reach. When Carlos needed new shoes, his mother often had to cut back on groceries. When he needed a new racket, his father would stay up all night hand-stringing the frame, as if healing something worn out but still full of hope. Carlos first picked up a racket at the age of 4. It wasn't the easy-to-control junior type. It was an adult racket, heavy, long, and completely unsuited for his hand. But instead of complaining, he simply practiced silently under the faint yellow streetlights, amidst the sound of cicadas and serves that no one counted. There was no professional coach, no cameras recording to analyze his strokes. Only father and son and a quiet faith. If I don't give up, maybe tomorrow will be different. Years later, when standing on the podium to receive the trophy at Roland Garros, Carlos said something that brought the whole stadium to tears. I always think about those nights, when no one was watching, but I was still hitting, as if the whole world was looking. We often think talent is innate, but for Carlos, the foundation is not DNA. It is every callus on his palm, every fall on the brown clay court, and the silence no one witnessed, but always had one person standing firmly behind him with absolute belief. Do you remember the last time you persevered to the very end for something? The broken racket held together with electrical tape. The worn-out tennis shoes stuffed with newspaper to keep them snug. That boy, Carlos Alcaraz, still went to the court despite an empty stomach and streetlights too dim to clearly see the baseline. No one was watching. No one was live streaming. There was only the solitary bark of dogs in Palmar and a father restringing every single filament of the racket as if stitching hope into the cracked wooden frame. A child who once cried not because he lost a match, but out of fear. If I lose again, Dad won't have enough money to take me to the next tournament. And then 10 years later at Wimbledon, amidst the flashbulbs and cheers of tens of thousands of spectators, he walked out with a gleaming Rolex on his wrist, facing Novak Djokovic. A roar, an unbelievable passing shot, and history was rewritten. People started chanting Carlos's name as if hailing a new king of tennis. But what lies behind the title of successor to the Big Three? The truth at the 14-minute mark will make you see him in a completely different light. Because Carlos doesn't live in a $1 million mansion in Malibu. He still keeps a small room at his old house in Palmar, where the single bed still bears the mark of a felt-tip pen, Roland Garros 20, written by him at age 8. A place with no crystal chandeliers, but containing all the reasons why he never loses his way. No one knows much about the girl who often stood silently in the wings whenever Carlos won. Not an actress, not a model, just a recreational tennis player and law student, the only person who could make Alcaraz smile even after losing a match. But then she disappeared. What happened? And is Carlos truly living the life every athlete dreams of? Or are there unspoken cracks behind the glory? Subscribe to the Pro Tennis 360 channel now to not miss the most exclusive, hidden corners of the real lives of court legends. Because what you are about to see may forever change the way you look at Carlos Alcaraz. Until his name was called alongside the Big Three, the world started paying attention in 2022. Carlos was no longer a stranger. He conquered the Madrid Open after successively defeating Tsitsipas, Nadal, and then Zverev. Three names once expected to replace Ferrero, Djokovic, and Nadal. But for the first time, someone didn't just replace them, he surpassed them. That victory didn't come from luck. It came from incredible reaction speed, daring passing shots, and something that cannot be taught, courage. At the US Open the same year, Carlos became the youngest Grand Slam champion in history and the youngest world number 1 ADP. He sat in the press conference, wearing his Rolex, speaking like a statesman. I think I can still improve my serve. A year later, he defeated Djokovic at Wimbledon, ending the Serbian player's 10-year unbeaten streak on center court. A 5-set match where Carlos didn't just win, he captured the emotions of the entire world. But Carlos didn't celebrate too grandly. After shaking hands with Djokovic, he returned to the locker room and scribbled a few lines in his diary. The backhand in the second set is still not right. Need to adjust the hip rotation. We have had superstar players, but few are as coldly calculated as a computer, yet possess the soul of an artist. Carlos is both. He did not repeat a legend. He rewrote how a legend is created. If Federer is art, Nadal is power, and Djokovic is completeness, what is Carlos? Luxurious, but not ostentatious. The private life of a 22-year-old millionaire. With over $42 million earned just from ADP prize money and tens of millions from endorsement contracts, Carlos could live in a mansion in Beverly Hills. But he still keeps a room at his old house in Palmar, cramped, with old photos taped to the walls and the felt tip pen inscription above the bed. Roland Garros 20. He doesn't need crystal chandeliers to remember who he is. In the old garage, where his father used to park the bicycle that took Carlos to practice, now sits a BMW iX xDrive 40 and a limited edition Mini Cooper SE. But for Carlos, it is not showing off. It is a quiet reward for a long journey. Beneath the small kitchen, Carlos keeps a mini sneaker museum. From a few $1,000 Nike X off-white pair to the first Babolat shoes he bought himself with his ADP prize money. The soles are worn, but he still cleans them every week. The $1.2 million USD penthouse in Alicante? Rarely used. He prefers to stay in the on-site academy apartment. A bedroom, a whiteboard, listing goals, and a treadmill. No marble or columns needed, just space to continue training. In a world where many young athletes want to gain fame on social media, Carlos chooses silence. No selfies on yachts, no all-night parties. Just a bracelet his father gave him, a cramped shoe cabinet, and a goal board that always includes the line, "Win Australian Open." What is wealth to you? To Carlos, it's when you don't need to prove anything, but always know exactly where you came from. A nameless, unspoken relationship, yet always present. No public posts. No photos kissing on an Italian beach. Not a single confirmation to the media. But her name, Maria Gonzalez Jimenez, has appeared in every rumor related to Carlos Alcaraz's heart. Maria is not a model, nor an influencer. She is a law student at the University of Murcia, who once played amateur tennis at the local club, the same place Carlos started. They lived in the same neighborhood, just a few alleyways apart. Older residents in the area recall them meeting when Carlos was just 12, and Maria hadn't even dreamed of law school. No one has ever heard them confirm a relationship. But during every victory, when Carlos looks up at the stands, his eyes often stop at a brunette girl standing behind the coach, a place where no reporter's lens ever reaches. Once, in a backstage film after a victory in Madrid, Maria quietly handed Carlos a bottle of water. He smiled. No hug, no kiss, just a small nod that contained everything the media could not express. Since late 2024, Maria has no longer been seen. Some insiders suggest the two have paused to focus on their careers. Carlos refused all questions. I want to protect the most important thing from the spotlight. But when you ask the people of El Palmar, they don't need a statement. They still remember the look in Carlos's eyes whenever Maria came to the court. And in the world of sports, often dominated by love scandals and emotional displays, that nameless relationship is what makes Carlos different. Because sometimes, the truly most valuable things don't need to be spoken. They just need to exist. Have you ever kept a relationship secret because it was too important to share? The first cracks in the crown of the golden boy. Carlos entered the ADP as a breath of fresh air. Young, humble, scandal-free. But at the pinnacle, every gesture is magnified. And then, the first cracks appeared. At the Cincinnati Open 2025, after a surprising defeat to Gael Monfils, Carlos, who is always praised for his composure, suddenly threw his racket onto his chair. A brief moment caught on camera, which immediately went viral. Instead of keeping silent, he proactively spoke out. "I apologize for my behavior yesterday. I am human, and sometimes emotions cross the line." An apology that was not defensive, did not lay blame, just the truth. Next, in the Netflix series My Way, Carlos stated directly, "I believe you can enjoy life and still be world number one. I don't think you have to live a monastic life to become a legend." A view contrary to the ascetic philosophy of Nadal or Djokovic. Immediately, Spanish newspapers headlined, "Alcaraz chooses pleasure. Is there still a chance to make history?" Veterans like Bautista Agut and Feliciano Lopez didn't name him, but hinted that the top is not for the easygoing. Carlos did not respond. But a few weeks later, he won Monte Carlo. Then the biggest scandal happened. His name appeared in the PTPA lawsuit founded by Djokovic against the ADP. Carlos immediately denied it. "I had no knowledge, did not agree, and do not want my name in any legal files." The organization was forced to remove his name, but the notoriety spread. Standing on the line between tennis powerhouses, Carlos was like a person caught in the middle of a storm, not for guilt, but for being noticed too much. The world no longer saw him as the golden boy. They saw a young man learning to stand firm under pressure. Have you ever been misunderstood despite doing nothing wrong? Carlos has, and he chose to respond with composure and a championship right afterward. Legends don't wait for age. 22, and achievements that exceed all expectations. At age 22, when many players are still struggling in the ADP qualifiers, Carlos already holds 3 Grand Slams on 3 different surfaces and is approaching the legendary career Grand Slam. From the 3.5-hour victory at the US Open 2022, where he became the youngest world number 1 ADP in history, to the historic win against Djokovic at Wimbledon 2023, ending the King of Grass 10-year unbeaten center court era. Then Roland Garros 2024, where he embraced the trophy on the surface that once drew blood from his knees. No one calls him the successor anymore. They call him the creator of a new era. The failure at the Australian Open 2025 cost him the chance to complete the Grand Slam set. But after the loss, he wrote in his diary, "I'll return and I will win." Not a word of excuse, just a promise. He returned to Monte Carlo and crushed his opponent after losing the first set. In Madrid, despite an injury, he chose to withdraw instead of playing half-heartedly. For him, the pinnacle is not just winning, but knowing when to take a step back to go further. Carlos also doesn't hide his Olympic dream. He is targeting Paris 2028, not for ATP points, but for national legacy. He is willing to skip many major tournaments to fully commit to the gold medal. If he maintains his form until 2035, reaching 25 to 30 Grand Slams is feasible. But when asked about Djokovic's record, Carlos only smiled. "I don't count idols. I only play because tennis is the way I exist." And that is what makes him most dangerous. When opponents fight for glory, Carlos competes for survival. The times he was forgotten and the power of choosing silence. In mid-2025, Carlos suddenly disappeared from the media. No interviews, no posts, no new contracts. There were only tournaments practice sessions, and a player who was almost invisible off the court. While peers like Holger Rune or Jannik Sinner competed to appear in advertisements, talk shows, and fashion events, Carlos quietly withdrew from spotlight. His Instagram account with over 5 million followers wasn't updated for 3 months. Some fans worried, injury, depression, or an identity crisis. In reality, Carlos was doing what most young athletes don't dare, resetting everything. After the defeat at Indian Wells and the injury in Barcelona, he chose to return to the boarding facilities at Villena. No expensive wine, no traveling, only the treadmill, racket, and a whiteboard with the inscription, "June, Roland Garros, Redemption." His absence made people realize one thing. When Carlos is not present, the ATP lacks rhythm. The Madrid Open, once the stage that made his name, took place in a duller atmosphere than usual. No one criticized his absence, but the stands were missing the unbelievable passing shots, the top spin jumps that angled in the fifth set. Carlos's silence is not evasion. It is a declaration that in an age of noise, knowing when to say nothing is the most powerful voice. Have you ever chosen to take a step back, to rediscover the reason you started? Carlos has, and that is why he has never disappeared. When the media no longer controls the legend, Carlos has never been a media darling. He doesn't indulge reporters, doesn't answer according to a script, and absolutely does not say what the public wants to hear. In 2025, a reporter asked, "What do you think about being called the next icon after the big three?" Carlos simply replied, "I am not following anyone's steps. I am on my own path." An answer that silenced the press room for a few seconds, not out of arrogance, but because the truth was too clear. For most young players, PR is a crucial weapon. But Carlos has never followed the mold. He refused a fashion contract because he didn't want to wear uncomfortable clothes. He declined invitations from many luxury brands because "I don't need more jackets, I need more sleep time." Another time, in a behind-the-scenes documentary, the camera caught Carlos refusing a last-minute interview because "I just lost, I want to practice my backhand before it gets dark." The Netflix crew was astonished, but couldn't edit it into drama because there was no scandal. There was only a person living true to their values. That makes Carlos dangerous. When you are not dependent on an image, you are not afraid of losing your image. And when the media cannot control you, you start controlling your own story. In a world chasing likes, shares, views, Carlos still chooses to keep the truth inside. And that is why he becomes an icon, not because the press wrote it, but because he carved it himself. When the biggest dream is not a title, but the reason for existence. 22 years old, 3 Grand Slams, countless records, defeating the legends who dominated the ATP for over a decade. But whenever he returns to El Palmar, Carlos reverts to the boy of yesteryear, sitting on the old wooden bed, cleaning his match shoes, looking up at the faded inscription, Roland Garros 20. A memory, a reminder, and a reason to continue. He is not the GOAT yet. He doesn't have 24 Grand Slams. He hasn't won an Olympic gold medal. But perhaps it is that very imperfection that makes Carlos's story the most real. In a world where people try to build a flawless image, Carlos dares to show his flaws, fatigue, and losses, but still returns. Not because of the pressure to win, but because he cannot live without tennis. You might see many great players, but few make an entire generation believe that if a boy who rode a bicycle to a clay court can reach Wimbledon, then perhaps no one is born to stay on the ground forever. And if you have ever believed in something bigger than limitations, subscribe to the Pro Tennis 360 channel, because every week we will bring you perspectives the press never reveals, and stories that might make you look at yourself. So, in your opinion, is Carlos Alcaraz just a temporary phenomenon, or is he the one who will rewrite the entire history of tennis? Leave a comment.